So good morning. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for our webinar today, Simple Streaming Data with PubNub and Mapbox. So my name is Grace, I'm the marketing manager at PubNub. We're super excited to have one of our partners with us today, Mapbox, joining for this webinar. Chris is from Mapbox, and Chris, do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure. My name's Chris. I'm a sales engineer for Mapbox. I work specifically in business intelligence and analytics. And my role at Mapbox is really just to help developers and customers be successful, either getting started or build amazing things, but also to push the boundaries of our product. And so hopefully we're going to show you some really interesting stuff on the demo today.
And last but not least, we'll also be joined by Craig Conover. He's our amazing support manager who will be online with us answering your questions throughout the webinar. If you can see on the control panel, there's a little questions box. Feel free to submit your questions there, and Craig will be answering them throughout. Though keep in mind, the last 15 minutes will be more of a live Q&A format. If your questions don't get addressed immediately, we can go over it then. Yeah, so we've got a lot of exciting content to go over with you today. I'll be beginning the webinar with a quick introduction to PubNub. Then Chris will be taking over to tell you more about Mapbox and giving a really cool demo, and we'll be telling you a little bit more about our PubNub and Mapbox unique partnership. And finally, the last 15 minutes will be reserved for the Q&A. So some of you might already be familiar with PubNub, but for those of you that are new, welcome. I'm going to be giving you a quick introduction to PubNub. So PubNub can connect any device in the world in under 250 milliseconds. So let me tell you a little bit more about how that's helping developers with real-time innovation today. If you think about just 5 years ago, people didn't mind waiting 15, 20 minutes for their device client to request data from the server. But keeping users waiting is a thing of the past now. Real-time technology and apps that deliver information to users as it happens is very much part of our everyday lives. People expect to receive real-time data in real time with always-on connectivity. So think of Uber or Lyft or medical alert and chat applications, Internet of Things applications like Nest or August Locks. Incidentally, PubNub powers many of these companies' real-time applications, and some of them include like Yelp or Athena Health, ESPN, Pocket Gems, eBay, and so forth. Real-time technology has become integral to many of our favorite products, and as a result, we just often don't recognize it as a specific feature since it's just simply expected. So while customers and users are demanding real-time products now, building out the required infrastructure for a real-time application is very challenging. And there are several factors you have to consider. On the security side, the requirements are different than for traditional request response infrastructure. How do you encrypt data without introducing latency, for example? On the reliability side, how do you deliver 5 nines SLAs when you have data centers around the globe? How do you deal with mobile devices that can lose connectivity sporadically? On the scalability side, how do you scale while remaining sensitive to latency, geographic distribution, global synchronization, and the ability to handle spikes? Building out this infrastructure by yourself takes time and expertise, which can easily get expensive and detract you from your core competencies for, i.e. customer innovation. PubNub can enable application developers to leverage the best real-time technology without having to earn your PhD in real-time infrastructure. PubNub's been in business for a little over 6 years now, and we power some of the biggest and best innovators who require real-time technologies all around the world. Whether it's social apps, IoT, chat, or collaboration, real-time is everywhere. As the largest distributed computing network in the world, we're already processing 5 times the amount of data than Twitter, and we're just getting started. We have over 2,000 customers, and we're on 330 million unique devices publishing and streaming streams of data. Our customers are finding new ways to innovate and monetize these streams every day. So let me just give you a quick overview of PubNub's major features and how it can work within your environment. PubNub takes its core of PubSub type, low latency, bidirectional communications, and builds several features on top of that to help developers create all sorts of real-time innovations even faster. It wraps this platform of messaging and related features in a tight layer of security that includes fine-grained access control. You can also easily integrate PubNub into your larger deployment, whether it's on-premises or in the cloud on GCP, Azure, or AWS, via PubNub's gateways. And for a little bit more detail on the major PubNub features, for example, Gateway supports integrations to the major cloud hosting providers, as well as mobile push integrations to Apple push notification services and Google Cloud Messaging. Presence detection provides presence and state functionality and makes it easy to answer the question of who's online and what are they doing. The blocks catalog offers dozens of partner-built open source serverless applets to help you innovate on PubNub more quickly, which is something that Mapbox is a part of. Stream Controller allows you to receive messages on multiple channels from a single network connection. So this extends your ability to connect to and manage large numbers of streams while keeping bandwidth costs to a minimum. And storage and playback, also informally referred to as the History API, enables you to store messages as they're published and retrieve the previously published messages at a later time. And finally, functions provide serverless logic within PubNub's network, so you can apply programming logic to streams of data. So from here, I want to let Chris take it over and let him tell you more about Mapbox and intro that demo he's going to do.
Sure. Thanks, Grace. If you want to pass the ball over to me, I will walk everyone through who Mapbox is and what we're going to be showing them today.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Oh.
So Mapbox is a developer platform. The way I like to describe it is we want to empower developers to be able to build anything that has to do with location, whether it's simple maps that are rendered beautifully at 60 frames a second, or geocoding, or they want to build a navigation app. We provide the building blocks to build, as we can see on my screen, build experiences for exploring the world. Now, we have lots of other use cases, whether it's data visualization, mobile applications. We actually have expanded into gaming and automotive. Our core APIs are available everywhere, and we use the most modern frameworks. Everything is built that you can use JavaScript, you can use React. We integrate with your development environment to help you build the application that you want. So enough about who we are. I think what everyone's here to see is actually the demo. So let me quickly walk you through what we're going to build. It's really 3 parts, but the whole point of our demonstration today is to get you started as quickly as possible, streaming data and visualizing it geospatially. So we're going to build 3 things. The first one is an actual streaming application, just how quickly you can power a stream. So this is consider this our source data. We're just going to be generating data and passing it into PubNub. And then the second demo will be consuming that stream. And it's a flight tracker app. So whether it's asset tracking, moving cars around, or race tracking, like you're running in a marathon or a bike race, this is how you would do it very simply. And then the third one is we wanted to take it up a notch. We wanted to build something that's a little more interesting. So we're going to turn the stream up, both in terms of volume and speed, and we're going to build what's an interactive heat map, similar to what you may want to use in sort of a web analytics environment. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to switch over to my development environment, and you're going to see keys, and that's fine. Don't worry, I'm going to rotate everything when we're all done. And the first thing we're going to build is our stream. So we need, in order to build any sort of application, we need to have a data source. We're going to build everything today in React. for those of you who don't know about React, it's an interface designed by, a library designed by Facebook to help build user interfaces across multiple platforms. It's meant to be fast and easy to use. Our streaming application will be written in Node.js. Mapbox is a heavy Node.js shop. And so we want to make sure that we're building with modern infrastructure and modern libraries so that you can take advantage of the most modern development features. I should also say that we support many different coding environments, and I believe, Grace, you can correct me, I think PubNub has somewhere north of 60 SDKs. So you can write your application in whatever language you want.
Yeah, we have actually over 70.
Oh, whoops. Okay. Okay. So this part is kind of the boring part. Let's go ahead and walk through it. So first off, all we have to do once we install PubNub via npm is we bring it in. I pulled a set of CSV data from flight routes. I live in Seattle, so this is just flights that originate in Seattle and fly anywhere. So there's 150 different routes that I used. Up here at the top is really just some boilerplate to convert CSV into JSON. And we have this library here called Turf. Turf is a Mapbox supported library, open source. The core of Mapbox actually is open source. We want to make sure that the stuff that we build can be extended upon and contributed to by the community. And Turf is a geospatial analysis library. So it helps us with a lot of features around calculating distances or converting lines or generating polygons from points. But to get started with PubNub, all we need to do is declare our keys. And as Grace said, this is a secure connection, so we have our SSL enabled. We pull in our data, and we're just going to convert our CSV into JSON and then into an object that's an array of coordinates. So we're going to pass in 150, 500. We'll get individual points for every single route. So there's 150 routes, and we're going to do that 500 times. But in order to get enough points, because all we have is an origin and a destination, this is what we're going to use right here. So Turf has this wonderful function called Great Circle. Because as we know, if we're traveling, we're not actually moving in a straight line. So Turf is smart enough to know between 2 points, how do we account for the curvature of the Earth? So we're just going to pass it our origin and our destination and tell it we need 500 points. This will give us a nice, smooth data set. And then every second, we're just going to pass it into the stream. And so if you've ever seen any sort of programming, this is the most basic out there. It's just a for loop. And we're just going to pass it into the stream with coordinates. Turf is also going to help us calculate bearing. So if we decide to later, we can actually align our marks so that they're always pointing in the direction that we're flying. Now, we're not actually using the marks, a plane in this case, but if we wanted to, that data is there. We're also passing in the destination so that when we get to our interface, we're always able to tell where we're going and how far we have to get there. So we don't have to know that beforehand. We just are passing the data that we need. And then here we just have a little bit of logging to make sure that we're doing it, and then we publish it into the stream. Now, Mapbox itself tends to like to consume Geo Json. Now, if you don't know what Geo Json is, it's essentially the same thing as JSON, but with a property around coordinates. Now, normally we can subscribe to this and the stream and then do all the transformation we need client side, but we don't want to do more work than we have to. We don't want to add, as we add more data and as we add more velocity, we don't want our application to have to work harder than it has to. So PubNub has this wonderful feature called a function. If any of you are familiar with AWS Lambda, it's very similar to that. And in this case, what we're doing is we're subscribing our function to the stream. And before the data is actually delivered to the clients that subscribe, we're going to ingest it, process it, turn it into Geo Json. So when it gets delivered to our application, it's ready to go. And that way, Mapbox just has to ingest the data and render it. And the really wonderful thing about this development environment is, one, it's all in JavaScript. and it's globally available. So this is, leveraging PubNub's distributed environment and their CDN. So you don't have to worry about latency here. It's always going to be processed in the best location possible. And anytime we make a change, it's going to deploy it for us. So it solves some of the deployment challenges that you may experience with like Google Cloud Functions or Amazon AWS Lambda. It's a little hard to see here. So I have the function here. And all we do is we take the request, we set up an initial Geo Json object, and we just write a function here that takes the input and basically creates an additional item to add to our array, pushes it into the array, and then returns that as the original request. So to the client, it's all going to seem as if nothing happened. It's completely transparent, and the latency is next to invisible. I'll actually turn the stream on really quick, and you can see it down here in the channel. So we'll just run our stream, and you'll see some logging here. So Turf will initially process it, click, click, and then behind the scenes, you can actually see that function running, and it's logging out. This is completely valid GeoJSON. It actually, if you drop it into geojson.io, it'll actually render on the map for you. So we know that we're passing real valid data. We'll go ahead and clear that out, and then get to the part that everyone's interested in, which is the application. As I mentioned, we're building in React, and one of the really nice things about React, outside of it being the hotness on the in the market right now, is that if you are just starting to build interfaces, it's a very logical way to get started. JavaScript can be intimidating. I know for myself, when I started learning it, I wanted to tear my hair out, and as you saw from my picture, I don't have any left. But it's a really great way to encapsulate your thinking. The core of React is components. So each component does one thing, and then you chain them together into a model where you can update once and reuse your components. And it makes life a little more logical and a little easier to use. So the way our application is set up is we have app.js, which is where we describe everything. So we import our stream, which is our next component, and we set up all of our keys. So I only have to change them once. Like when I eventually rotate my keys after this demo, I just have to change them here, and everything's going to work. I set up which channel I'm going to subscribe to in my stream. You can publish to any channel you want. I just chose channel 1 because it's the default. And then I set up my Mapbox token. Now, this app component, its job is just to go get our stream component and render it. Now, what's in our stream component? Our stream component is basically all of the pieces that we need in order to access the PubNub stream, collect that data, and pass it to the map to be rendered. So let me walk you through how this works. It's really very simple. The first part is we connect to the PubNub library up here, and then we're going to import our map component, which comes in later. The first thing we're going to do is just declare a variable called message, which we'll use to pass down to the map component. At the very beginning, as soon as our app starts, it's going to launch this, which says, okay, go get all of the things that app is passing to me, and then we're going to hook up to PubNub with that property of publish and that property of subscribe, which we saw earlier. And then the last piece is, okay, now that we have all of our subscription pieces in place, initialize. That basically says, okay, PubNub, I'm ready to go. And then from there, we're going to actually subscribe, pick the channel, and then here is actually just getting the message. This is really just a placeholder and not what we're actually going to use. The last piece here is, okay, we have that global variable of message. We're going to access that data every time it's passed in. So our data could be coming in every 10th of a second, every 100th of a second. Or if you're really using some of the advanced features of PubNub, you could be subscribed. You could have multiple devices passing data into the stream at multiple intervals. We call this multiplexing. And so this is just saying anytime new data comes in, we're going to grab it. We're going to step into the actual object that PubNub passes us, and we're going to set the data that we want, which is the coordinates, or in this case, the valid Geo Json, and assign it to the variable of message. Why do we do that? Well, one, it makes life simple, and two, when we step into our map, all we have to do is just pass that variable into the map. We call this a prop, along with the token, which we pass down from the application, and then the map just knows how to render it. And then now that we've covered PubNub, let's talk about how we integrate with Mapbox. So the most basic way to do this is you import our GL library. So a little history, GL is a technology that actually was originated in video games, and it allows us to render our maps and our data at 60 frames a second on any device. It's a really powerful technology, but all you need to start using it is just this one library. So we're going to set up a little bit boilerplate here, and then set up a tooltip so that when we hover over our point, we're actually going to get some data out of it. And we'll cover how this all works in just a second. The first thing we need to do is set up where our map's going to be. Zoom level 7, Latin long coordinates, so that's Seattle, and our access token. We pass these values from state into variables, so it's just easier to reference. And just like with PubNub, we just build our map. So we tell it where to actually plot the map, what style we want to use. This is a default style for Mapbox. We call it Mapbox Streets. You can use any style you want. So if you've used Mapbox Studio, or you found someone with a really great public style, you can just drop it in here and change your background. And then we pass in our center and our zoom. The next piece we do is once the map itself has been loaded, we're going to add some data. There's no real data here, so I mocked it up and said, okay, give us a place to start. And we have once we add our data source, and then we add the layer. So the source is the data, and the layer is how we want to render that data. In this case, we're going to give it ID of airplane and its type of circle. So we're just going to plot a circle. And the source is the point, and that's referencing up here. And then the last piece is how do we want it to be painted? Now, in this case, we just want a circle of radius 5 that's blue, that has a stroke width of 1 that's white. So we can have this, just nice, clean little circle. Ignore this piece here. We'll come back to this. And then the last one we want to do is we want to be able to attach a tooltip. So before we have the function that actually creates the tooltip, but how do we actually get that data? Well, Mapbox has this wonderful feature called query rendered features. Anytime you move the mouse on the screen, it's picking up the points. And in this case, we're going to pass that point and get get its lat long, set the tooltip at that lat long, do a little bit of styling, and then figure out how to render it. And we'll come back to the features that are being rendered. But for now, let's just take a look at how it works. The data we're passing in comes up here. Because it's valid Geo Json, we just snag it and then just say, okay, set the source data to the new data, and we're done. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. So here's our map, and there's our point. Let's start the stream. And you'll start to notice that as the data is coming in, it's passing in just as lats and longs, but now the map's moving. We've got this, we're seeing all of these flights moving out of Seattle, but let's hover over one. And we can see this one's going to Boston, and it's got 2,300 miles to go. Well, how do we know that? We're just passing in data. Like it's just asking for coordinates. But how do we know where these things are going and how far they have to go? Well, we've integrated into this tooltip a couple of additional features that Mapbox has. I mentioned earlier that we have this library called turf for geospatial analysis. But we also have a geocoding API. And what this API does is it allows you to move forward and backward and say, okay, I have coordinates, give me an address, or I have an address, give me coordinates. And so if we step into our actual tooltip component here, what you'll see is we're importing two things. So we're getting our distance function, which is just like Great Circle, and it calculates the correct distance as a great arc between 2 points, and Axios, which is just a promise-based API query. So it's just adding GET requests. So what we do here is when we pass in data to our tooltip, we say, get those coordinates, and then we fire it to our geocoder. And our geocoder is just saying, give me coordinates, and it's going to return some data. And we call this, look here, response.data.features. Now, if you have a perfect match, the geocoder will return one result. But if you have a kind of an ambiguous match, it will return a set of ranked results. And we score this based on user input and through our experience about what people are actually searching for. In this case, I know I just want the first one, and so pass that data into state. And so state is just what the component knows about itself. And then the last piece is anytime we invoke the component, which is here, it's going to go get those features, get the destination, and then it's going to call this distance function. Well, the distance function is literally just the same thing from turf. We pass it in a current location, which we get from the hover, and then the source destination, which is actually in the data itself, and it calculates in miles on the fly how far you have to go. And then all we do is render it as a little gray box with some text, and then we pass in the value of state and the distance into the tooltip. And as you saw before, there's really no lag here. So it's happening on the fly. You'll see a little bit of a change if we go to looking for Santa Rosa or Sacramento. But these are all using Mapbox services, and these are all being run client side. We're not caching any of this. So that's how fast it actually is you simply subscribe to PubNub, and then you pass in some data, and Mapbox takes it and you render it. It's so you can get away with a lot less code and focus more on what you want your application to do instead of figuring out how to solve all the complicated streaming. But if you notice those points moving, they're kind of gross. Like they don't look all that great. They're just points 1, 2, 3. What we would really like to do is to show off how the power of the Mapbox platform. And so we're going to animate these points. So that anytime there's a transition between point A and point B, we want it to smoothly transition. We don't want any jitter. Just like when you open up your Uber app or Lyft app and those cars are coming towards you, they're moving in a smooth line. So let's quickly, I wrote a function for this, and we're using Turf's cousin. We call this cheap ruler. It's a simplified library that can do the same calculations as Turf does, but in this case, we're doing them. Think of it as it's a simplified, little less precision, but it's faster. So instead of just passing in the data, we're going to animate them, and the way this works is linear interpolation. So we're going to take the previous point, which we have access to here. We always have access to anything about the map. We process those features, and then we run a giant loop over them and says, okay, get those points, find the most recent one, generate a new point. And the way we do this is we take the new data and the old point, and we draw a line between them. And then we use this function called along, which allows us to just step between point A and point B in an arbitrary increment. So we can say 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. The line may be 10,000 miles, but it's going to iterate over this until we reach the endpoint. And that's what happens here. So for and we do that for every point that we are rendering, so 150 times, and an increment of 0.005 miles. So if you think about that, you move from Seattle to Salt Lake City, that's hundreds of miles, and we're going to be incrementing in 0.005 miles. So we're going to be making a lot of calls to our rendering engine, and the best part is we don't have to worry about it. It's going to handle it. So we have that here. We'll just quickly make a change, undo this. So here's a little bit of it's just a little bit of boilerplate that passes in the correct data to our animation function, and then calls request animation frame, which handles the debouncing between one frame and the next, so that our map is nice and smooth. So we'll go ahead and let that re-render back to the same blue dots. We're just going to restart our stream, and you'll notice something a little different. They're starting to move in a slightly smoother fashion. Now there are some here in around Seattle that don't have to go too far. So even a 0.05 is a little too close. Oops. Nothing like a live demo. Let's try that one more time. And what you'll notice is as these extremely small increments are happening, we're still able to zoom. Like the map isn't affected. There's no performance lag here. So we're literally making thousands of render calls a second. And the tooltip still work, the map still works, everything still works. And so that's the power of Mapbox, and that's the power of streaming data, is that when you combine the two, you can really build a smooth, modern application without having to worry as to whether or not the performance is actually going to work. So that's the first one. We call this table stakes. Like, anybody can pass data in into their application, but we really wanted to test the power of Mapbox and PubNub. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to make a couple of changes. The first one is, let's go back to our app. We're going to switch channels. We're going to move over to channel 2. Channel 2 is going to be sending us data from a platform called Open Addresses. So Open Addresses is an open source system that maintains a database of every address in the United States. So we've taken every address in Washington and Oregon State, and we're going to make a heat map so we can see where people actually live. We're going to stream this in extremely fast. How fast is fast? Well, every 10th of a second is what we're going to do. So we're just going to run through our randomized list of addresses, and we're going to pass them into a map. Well, how are we going to render them? Well, we can't just plot points, because that would get confusing. And we could use a cluster and group them together into circles, but that wouldn't really be all that indicative, and it wouldn't, it actually just doesn't look very cool. So what we're going to do is use a recently announced feature of Mapbox called the heat map. So Mapbox will take these points, it will cluster them together on the fly, and it will style them in an ever-growing heat map. So as these points increase, we will also be able to interact with our application. We're not going to see any rendering issues. We don't have to change the map at all. It's because this isn't actually the one we're going to use. We're going to use the heat map. So up here in stream, we're just going to comment out map and bring in heat map. We're going to comment out the old one and comment in the new one, and then swap out for our heat map. Reload. If you're wondering how we achieve this kind of hot reloading, this application is built with Create React app. So all we have to do is focus on our code, and all of the building and testing and all that other stuff is baked in out of the box. So we don't have to worry about anything. Okay, so we see one little dot here in Seattle. That's just, think of that as a starter. Now this one's going to take a second, and while the application loads, or as the data loads, because it's quite large, I will explain to you how the heat map is actually working. All right then. Let's try that one more time. Well, it looks like we may have to debug this on the fly. So let's give that a shot. I see what the problem is. The data is asking for a CSV, and in this case, we only have a gzipped one. So let's go ahead and open that up. Piece of cake. Now this will take a second just because it's a very large file. As you can see, we had to up our node, our server size to 8 gigs of memory. So it'll take about 90 seconds here. And so let me while that's running, I'll walk you through the heat map. The beauty of the heat map is it really isn't much different than a regular map. It's just a different way of rendering data. So here, again, we start with our Geo Json, and we start with a single point. Now that's in Seattle. That's just a starter to show that we're actually getting started. It's the same base here, and it's the same container. And we add our data, and I call this taxi, but it's not a big. This is because I borrowed this from one of the many Mapbox examples you can find on mapbox.com. And all I cared about, the styling was great. It was actually created by a colleague of mine named Ryan Bauman. And so I didn't really want it to style it. I just wanted to add data. So we add our layer, and we just declare how intense we want it. This thing is, this array here is stops. So this is data-driven styling. So as the data increases, it allows us to define how it's represented, and both not just in intensity, but also how the viewport is actually being rendered. So as we get closer, as we zoom in, as you can see here, the properties will change. And so we don't end up with one gigantic blob of all time. We have a truly interactive and smoothly zoomable map. And just like before, what we do here is we take in the new data from the stream, channel 2 to the channel 1, and we just say for every point, turn it into a feature with a coordinate of the new point. We're just going to push it. We're just going to push it into the actual Geo Json and just set that data. So think of this as just an ever expanding array of data. And as you can see now, it's starting to render. So it looks like my terminal hadn't caught up. There it is. You can see it just completely flying in. And you can see the map kind of building itself with no detectable lag. And as we zoom in, you can see these different population areas start to spread out as we add new density. So we can see, as you would expect, Pacific North, the West Coast over here in Seattle, Tacoma area is quite popular. Also another population center over in Spokane, Portland, and Salem. But again, as we're zooming in, this heat map will disambiguate so that we can actually start to see the individual points and where these houses are actually being clustered. This is a really powerful technique because, as you can see, it's really immune to scale. We have examples of 1 million, 2 million, 5 million points on a map. And so you could extend this to web analytics. So as your website traffic is coming in and it's being IP, geocoded by IP, you could just have it streamed into a map and be aware of what your where your customers are actually, or your consumers are actually coming from. So it's what we at Mapbox and at PubNub and the great folks at PubNub want to do is to simplify your development experience. How do you build the things you want and focus on the functions as opposed to just writing endless amounts of code? So that concludes the demo. As soon as we get it to stop. I'll quickly summarize kind of how we built this, and then I'll pass it back over to Grace. So again, we started with React. It's a modern library for building interfaces. We took PubNub streams and in Node.js and built in 30 lines of code, we built the ability to stream as much data as we want into their system, transform it on the fly with a PubNub function, take that transformed data and pass it into mapbox-gl with our geocoding API to generate smooth animated points with live tooltips, and did geospatial calculations on the fly with turf and cheap ruler. So again, this is just the beginning. You can extend this however you like to whatever scale and whatever application you want, whether it's on Qt, native applications like Qt, or web mobile applications on iOS and Android, or you just want to build something in React Native, or just in raw JavaScript. All of these functions are available to you just out of the box, and you can get started really very, very simply. We just wanted to make it fast and easy to put your streaming data onto any map on any platform and build really great experiences for your customers. And that's kind of what we feel the power of PubNub and Mapbox is. So with that, I'll pass it over to Grace, and she can tell you how to get started. Grace, are you there?
Oh, sorry, guys. I realized that I was muted. Apologies for that. So again, Chris, thanks so much for that awesome demo. I really hope that it sparks some of everyone's creative juices. I know you touched on some of the ways that you can get started, but one of the things that I also wanted to mention is that Mapbox is Block's partner, and because of that, they have several other blocks on the PubNub catalog with everything including geocoding, geolocation, static maps, even Mapbox directions. So take a look at those. Those are all accessible and free from Mapbox and PubNub. So speaking of how to get started, these are a couple of quick links for you to get started with PubNub and Mapbox. As I mentioned before, it is free to get started with PubNub. We have a very liberal free tier that gives you up to 100 devices and 1 million messages. And if your company has any specific real-time needs, or you have a project in mind that you're working on, please feel free to contact us. We do offer a free consultation with our solutions architect to kind of help you run through and understand more of your project and how PubNub might fit in with that. Chris, you want to talk about how people can get started with Mapbox?
Sure. It's actually really straightforward. Just come and visit us at mapbox.com. You can sign up for a free account. And just like PubNub, we have a really flexible free tier. We want to make sure you're empowered to build and use all of our services. So once you have an account and you have a token, everything is available to you, whether it's the maps, Mapbox Studio for designing beautiful interfaces, our geocoding APIs, as well as the entire library of services. And unless you happen to, if you design a really extremely popular app, you just pay as you go. And we have a really wonderful community of developers. And if you run into trouble, one, we have a really great set of documentation as well as examples that cover a lot of use cases. But you can also just get in touch with us. We have a really wonderful support staff, or you can reach out to us on Twitter. But just get signed up, and you can hit the ground running.
Awesome. With that, we are exactly 15 minutes left for Q&A. So this is a time, if you guys have any specific questions, whether it was about the demo, if it's about PubNub or Mapbox, feel free to kind of, ask away. Just please do keep in mind that there is a survey a quick, 3-question survey at the end. Would really appreciate getting some of your feedback about what you thought of the content, what other webinars you'd like to see from PubNub and Mapbox together. Otherwise, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask away. All right, cool. Oh, somebody asked, is this presentation going to be recorded? Yes, this presentation is recorded, will be up on the PubNub website where our webinars live. You will also get a link to that and the follow-up email that will be sent to you tomorrow. Thanks, Alberto. Alberto said great presentation, but no questions. Yeah, if you guys don't have any questions, that's okay too. We're always accessible via our emails as well. I'm grace@pubnub.com. And the Mapbox support email is also available. Well, we don't want to take too much of your time. Thanks so much for joining us again. And Chris, thank you so much. That was a really great presentation. And yeah, thank all of you for joining us. We hope to see you at our next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.